without further ado. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about this class because this class is going to be Talmudic style. It's going to be the yeshiva study style. If you're familiar with the yeshiva, it's like the academy where we study most of the day Talmud and philosophy and stuff like that. So we're going to have some Talmudic style logic discussion, some back and forth, and I think it's going to be fun. So let's get right to it, and we're going to start with talking about drones. Okay. Hello, Olga.
Hi.
Good evening. Good to see you. Just getting started. Okay. Hello, Finur. Sure. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So I would like to begin with speaking about drones. So today it is easier than ever to monitor people different ways. And let's talk about drones for a moment. Is droning an invasion of people's privacy? Okay, so let's just to jump right into a little story. Let's look at our text page, and we have a story. I think it's from 2015, August of 2015, if I'm not mistaken. In neighborhoods nationwide, the buzz of drones is becoming a common sound, as well as a source of conflict. Police blotters contain an increasing number of reports from residents complaining about uninvited drones hovering over their backyards. For the most part, such flights are legal, a fact that is prompting a backlash from anti-drone vigilantes. Vigilance, I don't know how to read that. Vigilance. In Hillview, Kentucky, last month, a homeowner blasted a drone out of the sky with a shotgun, saying he was trying to protect his daughters from being spied on. He was charged with criminal mischief. Police did not take action against the drone owner. Similarly, in May, a judge ordered a man from Modesto, California, to pay a neighbor $850 for peppering his drone with buckshot. In September, a man from Cape May, New Jersey, was charged with shooting down a neighbor's drone as it filmed houses along Seashore Road. So, different places. This is from a news piece in the United States. Obviously,
you can't drone in the city, right?
So every place, especially now.
Sure. I think you can't drone around the airport, at least.
You can't drone around the airport.
It doesn't even let you. I have a drone, and it doesn't even let you take off during this.
Really?
How does it?
Anyway, sorry.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
not an engineering class either.
It just does.
So.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Whoever's afraid of these cookies, they're spelt and honey, so there's nothing to be afraid of.
Afraid of
Good to know.
cookies. No way.
Enjoy.
So this news piece is from 5 years ago, and 5 years is a long time when it comes to legislation with modern day technology. I'm sure different countries have different laws, and even within the United States, I know that it varies from state to state. There are different laws in each place. So I would like to talk about this from a Jewish perspective, and it would also probably be interesting to compare it to the laws that we know in Iceland or wherever else. I only read up quickly on the Icelandic laws on droning. We could talk about that in a bit, but I'd like to start thinking about these questions of privacy and is it an invasion of other people's privacy? Is it allowed? Should it be allowed? this is only one example, a drone. I'd like to take another example of a nanny cam, right? So is it ethical to use a nanny camera to ensure that children who are with the nanny are being cared for and treated well? Is it an invasion of the nanny's privacy? Does the child's welfare override perhaps the nanny's rights to privacy? So let's look at the second piece of text is another story. In a story out of Dallas today, a babysitter was discovered to have spanked a 5-month-old, not knowing that a nanny cam caught the whole incident. In this case, the nanny cam was unmistakably a good idea. What about at other times? What if your hubby taped and judged your actions at the end of the day? What if your unexpected tantrum, yell, cry, or other emotion was caught on tape? Hidden cameras are everywhere, from parking garages to department stores to the ATM. At what point are they over the line? As one teenage babysitter said, personally, I think that there should be a warning first, like a disclosure or something. I don't think that I should be filmed. I mean, if the parents don't trust me, why am I working for them? Okay, so these are real life issues today. Droning, nanny cams. These are just some examples, but I think these are good examples because they've become popular. They're used a lot, and they also raise some serious questions. And when we think about what is the right thing and what is the ethical thing and what is the moral thing, we often make decisions, and we often reach conclusions based on where we stand. So, for example, a teenager who is doing babysitting, she is going to say, most probably, that it's an invasion of privacy. When she becomes a mother, she'll very likely change her mind because now she has another perspective. Now she's speaking from the perspective of a parent, interested in looking after the welfare of her children, and so all of a sudden she could change her position just because of her perspective. The same thing as with drones. You have I'm sure all photographers who are excited about drones and getting good footage and pictures, they would probably be more leaning to the more lenient side of it in terms of usage. So they will probably be on the side of the debate to allow it as much as possible. Other people who are not into drones, people who are just regular people, family people, homeowners, whatever it is, they'll think more about privacy. So very often we'll shape our views and opinions based on the situation that we're in and what we have going for us and what our interests are and who we have to look after. So that's why these issues become more tricky. So Jewish people historically, traditionally have always looked into the Torah for direction, for guidance, for instruction, for morals, for values. So we know from previous classes that the Torah has a lot to say on our everyday issues. We talked about our work week. We talked about, what did we have the last few weeks? The Torah has a lot to say on all different, on purpose and meaning of life and things like that. Torah has a lot to contribute to these conversations. The question is, could the Torah have something to say about modern day questions like this, drones and nanny cams? Torah is 3,000 years old. Is there something that the Torah could teach us about this, and what might that be? In order to get the Jewish perspective and the Torah perspective on these issues and questions, I think it'd be a good idea to give a bit of a background as to what exactly Torah is. And this is one of the big reasons why I thought this was a good class for this series, The Fundamentals of Judaism, because it comes back to the question of what is the Torah, what is Jewish law, and how does it work? So just to get to the very core, we throw words and titles like the Bible, the Talmud, and things like that. But what actually is the Torah? What is the system of law? How does it work? How did it evolve? And how does it work? So we'll get right to this, straight to the sources, and then we'll be able to expand upon that a little bit, or a lot. So let's look at the third paragraph that we have on our pages. And this comes from the third book of the Torah, the book of Vayikra or Leviticus. And it says like this: these are the statutes, the ordinances, and the Torahs that the Lord gave between himself and the children of Israel on Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. Could anybody find something unusual about this verse?
Torahs?
Excellent. Torahs, plural. Why does it say Torahs? It should say Torah. There's only one Torah, right?
Mm.
Anyone have an answer?
Are they separate from not the book, but the law, just in general?
Very good. You're getting to the answer you want. What do you want to say, Karen?
Yeah, there's multiple layers of the Torah. There's
Okay.
like the literal, and then there's the sub-literal, and then there's layers under that.
Okay, fantastic. In Rashi's words, Rashi is one of the most famous commentators on the Torah, and Rashi brings up questions on the Torah, the most basic questions. And on this verse, the question is, why does it say Torahs? So Rashi quotes the words the Torahs and gives an explanation. Why the plural form? This denotes two Torahs, a written Torah and an oral Torah. So there are actually two Torahs. There is the Bible, if you want to call it that, the Torah. And there is also a second Torah, if you will. It is the oral tradition. So basically, when the Torah was given, when we say the Torah, when the Torah was given, there was the written Torah given, the one we have in our ark. But together with the Torah that was received by Moses on Mount Sinai, together with that came an oral tradition that was taught to Moshe, and Moshe taught it to the Jewish people, and then it continued from one generation to the next, and we'll talk about the history in a second. In the words of Maimonides, actually we'll get to that in a second. So oral tradition, okay, we mentioned the oral tradition a few times in previous classes before this series. What exactly is the oral tradition? What is the second Torah that the Torah is referring to, which is the oral tradition? What is it made up of? So there are actually three categories of the oral tradition. We'll give them names: received, derived, and legislated. Okay, these are the three categories, and we'll explain what they are. Received means that there was a specific teaching that was taught by God to Moshe. They're downstairs on the shelf in the box. Oh, there's somewhere there.
Yes. Okay.
Would that mean Kabbalah, for instance?
That is included in the first category, yes. Received means a specific teaching that was taught by God to Moshe, and this exact teaching with all of its details were passed down. What were taught to Moshe, Moshe taught to the Jewish people, and then it was passed down from one generation to the next. That's the first category, and we're going to get into it more in detail in just a moment. Second category is derived. Derived means that the Torah created a system where laws could be derived from the Torah. According to certain rules, according to certain conditions, you could look at the text of the Torah and you could figure out from the text of the Torah laws and ideas and values or commandments that are not written clearly in the text. So that's the second category, and of course we're going to get into it more in detail, but that's the category of derived. So it's not written clearly in the Torah, but they are ideas that are derived from the text of the Torah according to certain rules, according to certain conditions. It's not up to anyone to say, oh, this makes sense to me, and this we could derive from the Torah. It works in a very specific framework. So that is the second category, and the third category is legislated, and that is pretty self-explanatory. The Torah gave authority to Torah scholars to create new laws to strengthen the Torah. Now, that doesn't mean that rabbis could say whatever they want. Again, this is within a very tight framework under certain conditions and certain rules. The Torah gives this authority to Torah scholars, and these ideas, these commandments, and these details that are legislated, if you will, by the rabbis, by the Torah scholars, this becomes part of the Torah, and there's actually a special commandment in the Torah to follow these details and these laws that are legislated by the rabbis. Now, just give you a couple of examples that you are all familiar with. The holiday and the mitzvah of Hanukkah. It's not written in the Torah, obviously, because the story of Hanukkah came much later in history, way after the Torah was given to us. So how could it be a mitzvah to light the Chanukiah? How could it be a mitzvah to light the menorah? So the reason is because it was legislated by the rabbis within this framework, following the conditions and the rules that the rabbis have, and this is included in the Torah. And the Torah, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to follow these pieces of legislation. Okay. Exactly. Same with Purim. Same with Shabbat candles. The Torah doesn't say light Shabbat candles, but this is something that the rabbis instituted within this framework that they're allowed to work within, to strengthen the mitzvah of Shabbat and to make the mitzvah of Shabbat beautiful, to honor it, to welcome it, and so on. Okay, so these are the three categories we have: received, derived, and legislated. Received are specific teachings that were received and taught to the Jewish people. So it's very exact, it's very specific. Then we have derived, where from the text of the Torah and from the words of the Torah, we could derive things that are not written there. And the third is legislated. So this is the certain authority that Torah scholars have, again with certain conditions, we'll talk about some of them soon, to legislate new things to strengthen the Torah and the like. Okay, so let's begin with category number one, received. In order for the Torah to be understood, and in order for mitzvahs to be understood, there must be an oral tradition. There must be an oral tradition. We're specifically going to talk about the first category now, but there must be something that accompanies the Torah. There must be a tradition and explanation that accompanies the Torah, because otherwise it would be impossible to understand what the Torah is talking about. And let's look at Maimonides, who lived 1,000 years ago approximately, who says exactly what we're saying now, and then we will give an example. Okay, so Maimonides, you could see it. Maimonides in the introduction to the Mishnah. Maimonides writes as follows: every mitzvah that God gave to Moses was given with its explanation. God would tell Moses the verse and then tell him its meaning, explanation, and all that was contained in the ingenious wording of the verse. Okay, so the verse might just hint at something, or the verse might say something in a very general way. And then together with that verse, God gave to Moshe the oral explanation. Okay, let's take an example of tefillin. Okay, where are my tefillin? Are they around here? Let's get involved in this example. Hands-on show and tell. Okay, just one small bag would be enough.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, schools are started, yeah. Okay.
Okay. So where does the mitzvah of tefillin come from? This is my tefillin bag. And inside is the tefillin. You could see two black boxes. This is still the case, but we'll just open it for the sake of understanding this example very well. So this is tefillin, okay? This is tefillin. It's a leather box. This is just the cover, plastic cover to protect it. This is tefillin, 100% leather, handmade. Inside here, first at the bottom, you could see these stitches around here. Stitches at the bottom of the tefillin. If you open these stitches, the cover opens up, and in this one, there's one big compartment that has a small scroll in it with parts of the Torah. And the second tefillin, this one goes on the arm for the duration of this mitzvah. And here you have the head tefillin. This one goes on the head. You could see the Hebrew letter shin on each side, one with 3 branches, one with 4 branches. Again, at the bottom, you see these stitches. If you open it up, there are 4 compartments. Here you could actually see the 4 compartments on the outside. And in each of these compartments, you have a portion of the Torah, so 4 portions in all. You could see they're perfectly black, they're perfectly square. A lot of very specific things that come along with this mitzvah. Now, it would be interesting to see the source for this mitzvah. What does the Torah say about putting on tefillin? What does the Torah say? Let's see what the Torah says. So it's in Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim. You could see it on your pages. It says, it's the Shema prayer. Most of you are probably familiar with the Shema prayer. If you're familiar with it, it's probably in the Hebrew, but I'm going to read it in the English just for the purpose of this discussion and for this class, so everybody understands what we're saying. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them thoroughly to your children. You shall speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a reminder between your eyes. In the Hebrew, it's ukshartam laot al yadecha v'hayu latotafot beinenecha. So it's one verse. This one verse that says, you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be for a reminder between your eyes. Okay? How, from this verse, do you have any idea how to make this? That it should be perfectly square, that it should be perfectly black, that it should be made of leather, that it should have these compartments, that this one should have 4, this one should have 1. what should be included, which Torah portions should be included in that, how they should be written. Where are all these details from?
Symbolism.
Where are all these details from? Now you might say, oh, maybe this is made up, or it's in, or we lost the chain, and we don't, maybe this is not the original tefillin. Maybe maybe we don't actually have what the Torah is referring to. You might think that, you might ask that, but consider this: there are Jewish communities and Jewish people in every single corner of the earth, and many of them in many parts of the world. For many years, Jewish people have not had contact, especially in the olden days, with other Jewish communities in other countries or other parts of the world. And yet, every single Jewish person today who has tefillin, they look exactly the same. They look exactly the same. They have the same 4 portions of the Torah. They're the same. They're exactly square. They're black. They're from a kosher animal. They're written in a certain way. All of these details, they're all exactly the same. How could it be that you have, for 3,000 years, you have Jewish people in all different parts of the world, many of whom don't have contact with each other? How could it be that they all have the same exact version of the tefillin? And Jewish people don't always agree on every issue, as you might know. So how could it be that we have the same tefillin in every country, every community? How could it be? The answer is that there was an explanation that came together with this verse. Just like Maimonides said, every verse that needed one came with an explanation. And the explanation for this verse talked about all of the details that I just told you, which portions should be in each of these compartments, how it should be designed, how it should be written, and so on and so forth. These details were taught to the Jewish people in the desert 3,000 years ago. And then each generation passed on this tradition to the next generation. And so even when the Jewish people were dispersed and in exile in different places in the world, the tradition continued to be taught, and the tradition was never forgotten. And the proof is that everyone has the same version of the tefillin. Okay, so this is a perfect example of the first category of the oral tradition. First category is received. Received means that these exact details were taught to Moshe. Moshe taught it to the Jewish people, and it was passed down from one generation to the next. Without the explanation, it would be impossible to decipher this mitzvah and to understand what is actually required. So this is the first example. This is a perfect example of the first category, which is the category of received. Now, how does this category help us with modern day issues? The answer is it doesn't, because 3,000 years ago they didn't have drones. 3,000 years ago they didn't have nanny cams, and so this part of the oral tradition cannot shed any light on these modern day questions. So this leads us to our second category. The second category is derived. Derived means that we could look at existing laws, we could look at existing details, values, morals, and we could derive from whatever text we have, and from whatever ideas we have, we could derive new ideas that are related to the old ones by application. So you have one law that speaks about a certain issue, and with certain conditions and within a certain framework, we could derive certain ideas and certain details and certain laws from the existing ones. Let's look at let's look at what the Torah tells us about this. Okay, so the Torah, we already had the Torah say that there are two Torahs. Okay, the Torah already told us that there are two Torahs, that there's the oral tradition. Now we're going to see how the Torah refers specifically to this second category of oral tradition, which is the category of derived. Okay, this is in the 5th book of the Torah, the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. You can see it's the second last paragraph on your page. Let's read it together. If a matter eludes you in judgment, between blood and blood, between judgment and judgment, or between lesion and lesion, words of dispute in your cities, then you shall rise and go up to the place the Lord your God chooses. That's referring, by the way, to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And you shall come to the Levites, Kohanim, and to the judge who will be in those days, and inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. So this is referring to the second part, to the second category of the oral tradition, which is derived. How is the judge, if something eludes you, right? The Torah is saying you have a question that didn't come up before. You have a question of the nanny cam or the drone. You have these questions that are ethical questions and are legal questions. How do we answer these questions? So the Torah, so it eludes you. We don't have this information in the Torah. So what should you do? The Torah says go to the judge. What will the judge do? The judge will figure out what the law is based on other laws. Okay, so this is a reference to the second category of the oral tradition, which is derived. Okay. Okay, so again, this is of course within a certain framework. The Torah has given authority to the judges and to Torah scholars to make the case and to apply existing laws to modern day issues, to the issues of the day. Let's look at the last text on the page. This is from Contemporary Halachic Problems, Professor David Bleich. The Torah contains not merely a set of laws, but also canons of interpretation, as well as principles according to which possible internal conflicts may be resolved. Once revealed, the Torah does not remain in the heavenly domain. Man is charged with interpretation of the text, resolution of doubts, and application of the provisions of its laws to novel situations. The foregoing should not in any sense generate the impression that subjective considerations or, who's going to help me out? Volitional inclinations may ever be allowed consciously to influence scholarly opinion. Torah study requires first and foremost intellectual honesty. It is a travesty of the halachic process to begin with a preconceived conclusion and then attempt to justify it by means of halachic dialect. Neither Hillel nor Shammai, two of the most important Jewish sages, nor any of their spiritual heirs engaged in sophistry in order to justify previously held viewpoints. The dialectic of halachic reasoning has always been conducted in the spirit of Yikov Hadin et Tahar. Yikov Hadin et Tahar. Let the law bore through the mountain. The law must be determined on its own merit, and let the chips fall where they may. Okay, so this is explaining a little bit more how the second category of deriving works. First of all, it could only, we're not getting so involved in the rules right now, but there is a specific framework, but there is this authority. But of course, this the first rule is that it's about the truth of the Torah and it's about the truth of the law. So it's not that we come with a certain perspective. It's not that we come to study with a certain opinion and then find a way to fit the Torah's text to our opinion. Not at all. It's about intellectual honesty. It's about the truth of the Torah. It's about the truth of the law.
So if I can just straight,
Yeah.
the law bore through the mountain, basically that the law solved the problem.
It basically means that whatever if the law reaches a certain conclusion, that is the law. It might not be popular. It might not. If you take a poll, it might not be the majority vote. It doesn't make a difference. If this is the truth, if this is the law, then this is the law. It doesn't make a difference if the people are going to vote you out of whatever office you might be in. That has nothing to do with Jewish law, with Torah law, and with the Torah. The Torah is about the truth of the Torah, the intellectual honesty of the Torah, and whatever the conclusion is, if it was reached in the proper way, in the correct way, then that is final. Now, here's
in a sense it's so powerful because in every way it's so powerful because in today, especially in today's day and age, things change depending on people's opinions and feelings on like however they wake up on a Tuesday morning. The Torah law is solid. It's not going to change no matter what. It is what it is. Right?
Now, Judaism, exactly. Judaism does recognize, and the Torah does recognize, that if you have two people deriving something from the text of the Torah, many, many times they will agree. But it's also possible that they'll reach opposite conclusions. Okay, and it could still be within the proper framework of the Torah. So in our prayer, just to give you an example, we say every day in the prayers, we actually in the pre-prayers of the Shacharit prayer in the morning, we include a certain paragraph which says these are the 13 principles of deriving laws from the Torah. And in general, there are 13 rules. Now, of course, these 13 rules have many details. They split into 32, and those 32 have many details and branches as well. But there are rules how to derive. You can't just look at the text and say, it seems to me that we could derive A from B. Okay, that's not how it works. It has to be according to these 13 principles. Now, you could follow these, two people could follow these 13 principles, deal with a certain question, deal with a certain modern day issue, and they might reach the same conclusion. But it's also possible that they'll reach different conclusions, and it doesn't mean that one is incorrect. It doesn't mean that one is incorrect. Just a second. What do you do? What do you do when you have these different opinions? Who has the final say? So the Jewish Supreme Court has the final say. How does the Jewish Supreme Court make a decision? They do it. They go by a majority vote. So the Jewish Supreme Court had 71 judges in order that there should be an odd number, should never be a tie. And the Jewish Supreme Court has the final say if there is two ways of interpreting something or two ways of deriving something. Now, it doesn't start at the Supreme Court. First, it starts at the lower courts. There's a whole system of courts. We could talk about that. Probably we could have a separate class just talking about that part of the legal system. But the idea is that it's very likely that two rabbis and two Torah scholars will agree, but it's also very likely that they could disagree, and then the ruling is up to the Supreme Court. Sorry, Heather, what were you going to say?
Don't be sorry. No,
Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm worried I might ramble now for them, so I'll try and keep this concise. No, this is just like catnip for me because, as you know, like I wasn't very observant and I'm very, very ignorant about all of this. I'm very aware.
I wouldn't say that, but to your question.
I'm very aware. No, I wanted to like just preface it with that. But and this is not me like bigging myself up, but I also studied law, and that's what I've done most of my adult life. So this is such a like fascinating like juncture for me of like the known and unknown. So I had the question, and I'm not trying to just be like smarty here. This is really something I'm like trying to
Please go
clear in
ahead.
my head.
I love questions, especially the ones that are very challenging.
Okay. It says here in the Deuteronomy section, and you shall come to the Levites, Kohanim, and to the judges who will in those days and inquire, who will be in those days, like the judges who will be and inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. Do you think that they make law? And those judgments, do they, so like, you know, that in like common law legal systems, judges set precedents. Like in the UK, a judge sets a precedent. And their ruling then becomes like part of the body of law, and it kind of like silts up on top of like the actual text, you know, like legislation. And so then any other ruling in the future, you can refer back and say, oh, well, there was this precedent set. In these decisions made by the Levites and the Kohanim, would you call them kind of like, I'm not meaning to map on like my like secular understanding of law to this, but I'm kind of think like, where do you put the boundary of like what is the law then? Are all of these decisions and judgments by the Levites and the Kohanim and the judges, is that part of then the law?
So your question is it the same? Just like in secular law, you have these precedents. Is it the same in Jewish law and Torah law?
Yeah.
The short answer is yes, and we'll get to the details in a moment. Okay.
Fascinating, but I'm sorry I've been rambling.
No. That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. The detailed answer is a little bit more complex, but we're going to get to it.
I would like to ask something about the Supreme Court, because if I understand it correctly, it has not actually been.
That's my next point. That's my next point.
Okay.
My next point is going to answer that question. Today, we do not have a Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the name of the Jewish Supreme Court. The Sanhedrin dissolved shortly after the Second Holy Temple was destroyed. The Sanhedrin was dissolved just because it wasn't possible for them under the Roman rulership. And in the difficult exile that they had, it was not possible for the Sanhedrin, for the Jewish Supreme Court, to continue operating. So today, what do we do when there is a question and there are two different opinions and there is no Supreme Court? So first of all, what do you do when you have a question? So instead of going in the Torah, it says when something eludes you, you go to the courts. We don't have the courts, so what do? So today, in the absence of the courts, we go to a halachic scholar, a Torah scholar, someone who mastered Jewish law, and we ask for his legal opinion, Jewish legal opinion, and this opinion becomes the halacha. Now, it's possible that you could have
means
the law, exactly. Now, it's possible that you could have, just like on the Supreme Court, you could have 35 judges saying one way and 36 judges saying the other way. So of course you could have the same thing nowadays. So what do? So the answer is that you follow your Torah scholar, your rabbi that you chose. Okay, so that's why you could have in different communities. Sometimes you could have different halachic opinions, because these different communities are following different rabbis, and with questions that arose after the Supreme Court was no longer. So if something came up and there was a difference of opinions where you have different rabbis, and we're talking about authentic rabbis who are deriving laws from the Torah in the correct and proper way according to the 13 principles and all of the rules, so you could still have differences of opinions, and this could explain some of the differences in Jewish communities today. Now, some of them are customs, some of them are laws. So if you have something specific in mind, we could discuss it. Not always is it because there's not always is a difference in community custom because of an argument or a dispute between rabbis. Sometimes it's just they're not necessarily arguing with each other, not necessarily is it a halachic dispute, but there could be halachic disputes today, and this is how they're resolved. So basically, the short answer to Finner's question is, what do you do in the absence of the Jewish court? You go to a Torah scholar who is going to who mastered the Torah, who is going to give a correct legal opinion according to the framework that the Torah set up for this Torah scholar to derive whatever, to derive the law and answer whatever new question, modern day question arose. Now, of course, so now we're gonna get a little bit closer to answering Heather's question. The person who is being approached for his Jewish legal opinion, and this Torah scholar who is supposed to give the halacha, who is supposed to give the ruling, it must be without any preconceived notions or agenda, like we were talking about before, and all of his legal opinions must be in line with previous halachic rulings and Torah values. So, talking about precedent, there's a lot there, but we're gonna get more into it. There's so much on the topic. I just need to figure out how detailed we should go. Does someone have the time? 9 o'clock. What time did we start? Start 8 o'clock. Okay, we have to move a little bit. Okay. I think Heather asked a very important question. Okay, Heather asked a very important question, which touches upon the larger question of how did the oral tradition evolve, and how does it work, and your specific question was, are there precedents and things like that? So let's get into that right now. Let's talk about the history of the oral tradition. And as soon as we finish this quick history of the oral tradition, we're gonna put everything that we learned to the test, and we're gonna practice answering a legal question, a modern day legal question. We're gonna talk about drones and things like that, but it's going to be according to everything that we already learned, and will also be in line with the history that I'm about to share with you.
Only Torah scholars.
Sounds good.
We're certainly going to climb into the heads of the Torah scholars and Talmudic scholars and all of that. Okay, the Torah was given in the year 1312 BCE. Okay, so about 3,300 years ago, the Torah was given. Thank you. Now, we already know from before that the Torah was given in two parts. There's the written Torah and there's the oral tradition. Now, the oral tradition remained oral for 1,500 years. For 1,500 years, the oral tradition was passed down from one generation to the next, from teacher to student, from parent to child. That's how it worked. It was around the time of the destruction of the Second Holy Temple, which was in the year 70 CE, that the men of the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, they organized a system to facilitate remembering and memorizing the teachings of the oral tradition. Okay, so you have to realize how vast the Torah is, the details of the Torah, Torah law, tradition, commandments. It is so vast. For 1,500 years, it was oral. but eventually it came to a time where they realized that there must be a more organized way. There has to be an official organized way so that people could more easily remember it. Now, for 1,500 years, how did they remember it? So every person was responsible for themselves. So people would study from their teachers, and then they would take personal notes. So then you could keep your notes, and then using your notes, you could teach the next generation. That's how it was. But after 1,500 years, they decided that there needs to be a more official and formal system of memorization. And basically what they did was they turned the oral tradition into a certain concise, a concise version, and it was actually recorded. It was actually recorded. It was written down by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. And this work was called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the system of recording the oral tradition in a very concise way. So I think what we could call the Mishnah is the notes, the official notes of the oral tradition. Yeah. Question, Heather?
No, things that is
Yeah. So the first time the oral tradition was recorded was 1,500 years after the Torah was given. Originally, it was not meant to be recorded, and hence the name oral tradition. It was supposed to remain oral, and we could give a whole nother class as to why it was supposed to be oral. But it came a time where it was not feasible anymore to keep it oral, and it became very clear, and the rabbis understood that in order to protect the Torah, in order to keep the Torah alive, it needed to be written down, at least in a concise form. So the Mishnah was recorded by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and I think we could call the Mishnah the notes, the very concise notes of the oral tradition. Now, Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel was lost. Jewish people went into exile. Jewish people were persecuted. People studied less. It was more difficult to get a Jewish education. And so even these written notes of the oral tradition was becoming difficult for people to understand. And it was becoming difficult for people to unravel because, again, they're notes. Look at your notes from high school. How much of it do you understand, right? You're not reading it every day, so you're not remembering it. So imagine in the exile and in the persecution, the Jewish people, it was not enough for them. So what they needed to do was they needed to record all of the explanations and the reasons and the discussions and the debates that were around the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is the notes, but the notes was maybe just a certain conclusion of the debate, or just the conclusion without the reason, or just the general idea without some of the details. So many of these things were being forgotten, and it needed to be recorded in a more detailed form, and it actually was. What is this book called? It's called the Talmud. The Talmud. Now, the Talmud is not one book. It's tens of books. It's about 60 books. The Talmud is the explanation of the Mishnah. So it records the debates, the discussions, the questions, the answers, the proofs, the refutes, the whole back and forth of that led to the conclusion and the concise note that's recorded in the Mishnah. Now, open the Talmud today. It's also quite complex, and not everybody could understand the Talmud, even if it's translated into English. It's not so easy to understand the Talmud. So what happened next? There came commentaries. Rashi, he's one very famous one that we mentioned before. Tosfos, many different commentaries to explain the Talmud, because the Talmud was becoming difficult to understand. Okay, but you have to realize that the Mishnah, I should say one more detail about the Talmud. the Talmud was recorded at a time where the political situation in the world, or specifically for the Jewish people, was good enough that it allowed for massive conventions of Torah scholars in Babylonia, and this allowed for Torah for the leaders, for the leadership of the Jewish people, the Torah scholars, to be able to convene and get together and put the Talmud down on paper. So this is the first precedent that I wanted to make very clear, and that is because of these conventions, and because they had consensus of the leading rabbis of the generation. So anything that is recorded in the Talmud cannot be argued with. Okay, now the Mishnah and the Talmud do have different opinions. So sometimes the Talmud and the Mishnah could record a certain issue, a certain question, and there could be two different opinions. It'll say Rabbi Meir says that it is permitted, and Rabbi Elazar will say that it's forbidden, right? And then there'll be reasons, then there'll be the debates and the proofs and the refutes and all of this. But there can be two different opinions. So what do I mean that it's a precedent and it cannot be argued with? What I mean is that there cannot be a third opinion in this particular issue. So a rabbi living after the Talmud could say, according to my conclusion, and according to my studies, and according to my halachic opinion, we should follow Rabbi Meir's opinion in the Talmud, or we should follow the majority opinion that the Talmud records. So the rabbi is the Torah scholar who's giving his legal opinion is going in accordance with the Talmud, but he cannot change from the Talmud, because the Talmud there was a consensus, there was a conclusion. Once the Talmud was closed, there cannot be an argument with the Talmud. You could say, I side with this opinion, I side with the other opinion, but there cannot be an argument with the Talmud. If the Talmud doesn't give a third opinion, then that third opinion is not considered to be a valid halachic opinion.
I have a question. It may be sidetracking a little bit, but as far as I know, there's another Talmud in existence, the Jerusalem Talmud.
Yes.
And what if, hypothetically, I don't know whether this is the case in any example, but what if there is a third opinion there? Would the Babylonian Talmud override that one in that case?
I don't want to get into that too much.
Okay.
But when I say the Talmud, I mean both Talmuds.
Okay, I see.
So they're actually recorded 100 years apart from each other, but without getting into it too much, just because of the time constraints. When I say the Talmud, I mean both.
Okay.
Yeah. So one was the Talmud that most people refer to as the Babylonian Talmud. That's the one it's extremely vast. But there is also a Jerusalem Talmud recorded in Jerusalem, and that is a much more concise version. But when I say the Talmud, that once the Talmud closes, everything must be in accordance with the Talmud, I'm including the Jerusalem Talmud in that as well. One more point about the Talmud, which is important to remember, which will lead us to understanding the next part of the history of the oral tradition, is that one issue could be discussed in different parts of the Talmud. So the same issue could be in one book and then revisited in another book because the discussion led to it, or there's more detail in another area. So just because you open a page of the Talmud and you see something written on one page of the Talmud, it doesn't mean that you have the authority to give a legal opinion on this particular issue, because not necessarily did you master all of Talmud. So it could be there are details that you're not aware of. Okay, so now this led to, so we talked about over the next generations, there were different commentaries on the Talmud. After a few hundred years, it became necessary to, for the very first time, there was something, Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, he recorded a book of laws, a book of Torah laws, but in a fundamentally different format. So before I told you that one issue could be spread over the Talmud in different areas. What the Rambam did, what Maimonides did, was he organized it by topic. He organized it by the issues. And he was the first one to do that, but he was not the last. There were many that continued in that path. And eventually, in the 16th century, this led to the Code of Jewish Law, also known as Shulchan Aruch. And again, this is all commentary on commentary on commentary, but everything is always in line with the precedent that came before. Everything is in line with the Talmud. Everything is in line with when one generation is studying the Torah, they will always take into account the previous generation. What were their conclusions? And so everything is built upon the previous generations. Everything is built upon the commentaries of the Talmud, and is built upon the Talmud, the Mishnah, the oral tradition. Everything is built upon. So there's nothing new here. We have new application. We have new. We could if in the 16th century there's a new question that they didn't have in Talmudic times, then they could derive from the Talmud and apply from an existing law in the Talmud that is something that is discussed in the Talmud, apply to the question of today. So again, then we have the rules of how to derive, but it's always going to be built upon the oral tradition that we have, starting with the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the commentaries that came after. And it always has to be in line with the precedent. It always has to be in line with what came before. Now, it's not to say that there are no arguments, but if there were only two opinions in the previous generation, or if there were only two opinions recorded in the Talmud, and the commentaries on the Talmud, maybe explained those and maybe took it a step further and applied it to a certain case, whatever it might be, there cannot be a third opinion. Or if it was already applied to a certain case and that case became clear, there was a certain consensus in the previous generation, that becomes final, because as long as there is this consensus between the leading rabbis. I know in a certain way I know that I'm speaking general in a way, but if you have any specific questions, we could get more detailed. But I'm trying to share in the limited time that we have how the Torah is a legal system which is very much alive. So it's a 3,000-year-old system where the Torah law is just as alive today as it was back then when it was given. So every word in the Torah is exact. Every word of the Mishnah, every statement of the Talmud, every reason that was given by the commentaries of the Talmud, all of these things, and then the Code of Jewish Law. The Code of Jewish Law, written in the 16th century, is not just somebody taking notes from the Talmud. If you have, let's say, two opinions in the Talmud and two opinions in the commentaries of the Talmud, the Code of Jewish Law tried to choose one. How does the Code of Law choose one? With a consensus of leading rabbis of the day. Then in the next generation, there would normally be no argument about the conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law. So the Code of Jewish Law said, this is the opinion that we follow. so in the next generation, there should be no question about that because the Code of Jewish Law wrote it. Now, in the Code of Jewish Law, sometimes there are various opinions, right? Sometimes, many times, the Code of Jewish Law did not reach a conclusion. It could say these are the two opinions. If you could follow the more strict opinion, and if you could, right? Just because it's a question, we want to play it safe. Now, it also could be that in certain instances, the other leading rabbis in the same generation differed with the authors of the Code of Jewish Law. Then it's possible that in the next generation you could say, okay, I don't follow the conclusion of the Code of Jewish Law. I follow his colleague who gave another opinion, and ultimately that opinion was included in the final version of the Code of Jewish Law, right? So the Code of Jewish Law then grew. Now the commentaries, if it's in the same generation, if they're colleagues and if they're peers, then they're of equal value, and then so that creates a precedent. So there's two opinions in the next generation. It could continue that way, and so on and so forth. I hope I'm being clear. I hope I'm not going too fast or too slow. But you see that it's an extremely comprehensive and complex system, which is very much alive today. You don't have Roman law, ancient Roman law being utilized today. You don't have ancient Babylonian law being utilized today, but Torah law is being utilized today in the purest form and in the strongest way, because every single legal opinion that is given, every single Jewish legal opinion that is given today must be in line with everything, with the whole history that we just shared. And this is just the synopsis. In every generation, there were multiple Torah scholars that had the authority, but we skipped some generations, of course, just because it's impossible to go through everything. But it's a very long history, and all of this history needs to be taken into account. So it is a very powerful and amazing and beautiful system of law that we have today in the Torah. Okay, now finally I would like to put this to the test. Okay, so based on everything that we learned on how we deal with questions, how we deal with new halacha questions that has not risen before, how do we deal with these questions? Let us climb into the heads of Torah scholars. Let us climb into the mode of thinking of how things are derived, right? So now we're in the second category, derived, because that's the category that's important when it comes to new issues. So let us climb into the heads of Torah scholars to figure out how do they go about answering these particular questions. And of course, we're going to, whenever it comes to answering this question, or whatever the answer is going to be, it's going to have to start all the way from the beginning. We're going to have to find the verse in the Torah, then the statement in the Mishnah, then the explanation of the Talmud, perhaps the commentary that comes after, and then finally the Code of Jewish Law, or something more relating to our issue at hand, that we could borrow one idea and apply it to our situation that we're dealing with. Okay? So this is now we're going to do real yeshiva study, okay? And we're going to climb into the heads of Torah scholars, and we are going to be Torah scholars and Jewish legal thinkers from this moment on. So fasten your seatbelts. So how are we going to answer the question of a drone? What are am I allowed to fly a drone over my neighbor's property? Am I allowed to fly a drone over the street? Am I allowed to hide a nanny cam in my dining room? You know, these are the questions that we're going to look into, and these are the issues that we need to resolve. Of course, it's going to, like I said, it's going to start from the beginning of the history of the Torah law, and we're going to continue from there. So let's look at page 2 in your text. We're going to read a bunch of texts now, and we're going to analyze the text together. So let's pay close attention to what we're reading, and we'll try to get some participation from you guys, and we'll try to reach the correct conclusions. Okay, so starting with the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, chapter 24, verses 2-5. Bilam, a non-Jewish prophet, raised his eyes. I'm missing a paper that I had some notes written on. Where did I put it? I have too many papers here. There it is.
I think that's probably common in schools like this.
Bilam, a non-Jewish prophet, raised his eyes and saw Israel dwelling according to its tribes. And the Spirit of God rested upon him. He proclaimed and said, I think there's a typo here I put this on a Microsoft Word sheet. It could be that I made a mistake. He proclaimed and said, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. In Hebrew, it's Ma Tovu O Halecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Again, this is a story of Bilam. Was not to get too involved in the details of the story, but Bilam was a non-Jewish prophet, and he was hired to curse the Jewish people. Instead of cursing the Jewish people, the most beautiful blessings came forth from his mouth. And this is what he said. He said, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. What was special about their tents that he's saying, how goodly are your tents? What was unique about their tents? I mean, the Jewish people, I think we could safely assume that the Jewish people's tents were the same as all of the tents of all of the people of the time. I don't think canvas was invented yet. I don't know, but if it was, then everybody had it. It wasn't just the Jewish people. So what does he mean? What does he mean by this? Okay. So who is going to discuss this? The Mishnah is not necessarily going to discuss this because it's not a law. It's not if you're writing a concise document with the most fundamental ideas and most fundamental details and most fundamental laws, and in a most concise way, you have no reason to talk about this because it's not even a law. I mean, it's just explanation of the Torah. Whose job is it to discuss? But it's not to. But it is part of the oral tradition. The oral tradition includes an explanation on this verse, and this was taught for 1,500 years. It was passed down from one generation to the next, from teacher to student, parent to child. So eventually, it was recorded, not in the Mishnah, but it was recorded in the Talmud. So the Talmud asks the question. You can see it on your page in the next paragraph. The Talmud in Bava Batra on page 60. A for the first side A, page 60, side A. What did Bilam see? That's the question of the Talmud. He saw that the doors of the Jewish people's tents were not aligned opposite each other. Whereupon he exclaimed, they are worthy of hosting the divine presence. Okay? Their doors were not aligned to each other. Okay? You look outside our door. Our door might be aligned with the French hospital. I don't know, but I'll tell you, certainly where I come from in Brooklyn, New York, where the houses are all touching each other. You open the door, and there's exactly these square blocks. You open the door, the opposite door is exactly opposite your door. That is not how the Jewish people set up their tents. So what was Bilam talking about when he said, how goodly are your tents? He was talking about how they were positioned. Okay? And because of this, he said they are worthy of hosting the divine presence, right? That's what the Talmud says. So what? Anybody want to give a comment? What does this tell you anything about privacy?
Yes, it's very architectonical, actually.
What's that?
It is very much about architecture here now.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
I mean, not because I want to move the conversation always into architecture, but it is about in a way, visual intrusion. So
Right.
if the door is aligned, then it means that if they are open at the same time, you can look into each other's private realm.
So what Mastimo is deriving from this statement of the Talmud is that the Talmud is giving a very strong value to this very sensitive type of privacy, right? You open your door, it's not, you can't see so much into the house, but nevertheless, the Jewish people were careful, and Bilam praised the Jewish people, and the Talmud recorded this to express the importance of this very sensitive type of privacy. Okay, following in the same path, following in the same conversation of privacy, we will move over to a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in the tractate of Bava Batra, and it's chapter 3, Mishnah 7, and it's you'll notice a very short statement. One may not construct windows that will face a jointly owned courtyard. That is the statement of the Mishnah. Now, pay attention. There's no reason in the Mishnah, right? So it's up to us to analyze. When I say us, I mean the Talmud, right? The Talmud that came after, or the Mishnah came with an explanation. It came with a reason. It came with a discussion. It came with details, but that's not recorded in the Mishnah. It was because they were forgetting that explanation that this explanation and this background story had to be recorded in the Talmud. But notice that in the Mishnah there is no reason, there is no discussion. It's a very, very short statement. One may not construct windows that will face a jointly owned courtyard. Okay? So let us look at the Talmud. And the Talmud, you'll notice, is the same tractate. It's the tractate of Bava Batra. But notice that it's on page 59b. It took the Talmud 59 pages to get to chapter 3, and the chapters are not very long. So the Talmud goes through Mishnah by Mishnah, line by line, and the Talmud goes through explaining all of this. So let us see what the Talmud derives from the Mishnah. And again, the Talmud is not making up new things. It's recording the discussion of the Mishnah, the backstory of the Mishnah, and perhaps deriving new things that are not recorded in the Mishnah. So the Talmud has many things that are not included in the Mishnah because there were many new questions that came up in the generation of the Talmud that did not come up in the generation of the Mishnah. So let's see, how does the Talmud analyze this Mishnah? From the fact that the Mishnah cites an extreme case, a jointly owned courtyard, as opposed to a courtyard that is not jointly owned, this means that one may certainly not construct a window that will face the courtyard of a neighbor that is solely owned by him. Okay, so the Talmud is saying is pointing out that the case that the Mishnah is giving is a jointly owned courtyard. So if you're not allowed to construct a window over a courtyard that you have 50% ownership over it, then certainly you're not allowed to construct a window over a courtyard that you have zero ownership over. Okay, So the Talmud is making this. This is common sense, but the Talmud is saying is making this case, and the Talmud is articulating, this idea which is derived from the Mishnah. Now, theoretically, if the Mishnah talked about this is what I'm going to say to you now is exactly how they talk in yeshiva. So if you want to go to yeshiva and feel right at home, you could talk this language. Theoretically, had the Mishnah spoken in another case, okay? Had the Mishnah spoken in the case of a privately owned courtyard, what would you say then? Right? So the Mishnah that we have in front of us is saying you're not allowed to construct a window over a jointly owned courtyard. But imagine the Mishnah said you're not allowed to construct a window over a privately owned courtyard where you have zero ownership over. What would you say then?
It's a more general statement. So I would assume that the statement about the shared courtyard would still be up for debate if you only had the general statement about the private courtyard.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So again, just to make it a little bit more clear, my question is: if the Mishnah made this. Said this rule about not constructing a window, if the Mishnah talked in a case of a privately owned courtyard where you have zero ownership over, what would the law be? According to the Mishnah, what would the Mishnah say? What would the law be? What could we derive? What would the law be in a case of a jointly owned courtyard? I have 50% ownership over it. What would the law be if the Mishnah spoken in a case of a privately owned courtyard? So Finner says it's up for debate. Okay. Anybody want to give some insight into that debate?
I would like to say, let's say you own
Just a second.
let's say you share a courtyard with your cousin, and you cannot build a window facing your cousin's home, and of course you can't build a window facing the home of John Johnson, who you don't know at all.
I'm not talking about the verse.
Okay.
I'm talking about the Mishnah. The Mishnah is talking in a case of a shared courtyard. Okay. What if the Mishnah was speaking in a case of a privately owned courtyard? What would the halachic ruling be in the case of what would the Mishnah then think, or what would the Mishnah then rule in the case of a jointly owned courtyard? Massimo, you were started to say something?
Yes, I think it would rule that then you can have a window.
Very good. Very good. Massimo is saying that if the Mishnah spoken in the other case, if the Mishnah spoke in a privately owned, then the Mishnah is saying only that is forbidden. But if I have 50% ownership over it, why shouldn't I be allowed to construct a window? I'm allowed to go there.
Yes.
I'm allowed to go there, so why shouldn't I be allowed to build a window over it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, but that's not what the Mishnah says. That's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah is talking about a jointly owned courtyard, and that's forbidden to construct a window. So certainly, in the case of privately owned courtyard, you're certainly not allowed to construct a window. Okay? Yeah. Okay. What Massimo just said, we're going to check in the Talmud to see if the Talmud agrees with Massimo. Okay? And let's see what the Talmud says. And it's the same page of the Talmud, 59b. One might have thought, however, that a partner to a courtyard may construct a window facing it, right? This is what Massimo said. One might have thought, however, that a partner to a courtyard, you have 50% of it, may construct a window facing it. Why? Because he can tell his partner, in any event, you have no privacy for me in this courtyard, because I may enter it whenever I wish. We now learn from the Mishnah statement that the other partner can reply. Until now, I had to take steps to preserve my privacy only while you were in the courtyard. If, however, you were to construct this window, I would have to be wary of you even while you are in your home. So Massimo is 100% correct. What Massimo said was that it's fair to assume that if I have 50% ownership over the courtyard, I should be able to build a window. Okay, and it makes sense because I could tell my partner, I can say that anyways you don't have privacy in there. You can't conduct private matters there anyways because I'm allowed to walk in, right? So that's a valid argument. Massimo, very good. It's a valid argument. But the Mishnah refutes that argument. The Mishnah says clearly, by the Mishnah speaking in a case of a sheared courtyard, the Mishnah says that it's forbidden to construct a window. So what is the Mishnah thinking? Why is the Mishnah arguing with this? Why is the Mishnah arguing with this reasoning? The Mishnah is arguing because of the reason that Talmud is saying. There's a counter argument. Massimo had a good argument, but there's a counter argument. The counter argument is the partner could say, yeah, it's true. I don't have privacy in this courtyard. But that's only when you're outside. I only need to be careful when I see you come outside of your house. So for 15 hours of the day or 5 hours of the day, I do have privacy. I see you open your door and come out. Okay, now I need to cover what I'm doing, whatever it might be. But if you have a window, then I'll never have privacy. Even when you're at home, you could just look through the window anytime and I have no privacy. So there is a counter argument there, and not to say that the previous argument was no good. But the Mishnah is giving a clear ruling. The Mishnah is giving a clear ruling. The Mishnah is saying that you're not allowed to construct this window because of this privacy issue, even though you have 50%. But it's fair to say that the partner should be allowed to have his privacy in the garden when you're at home. If you're in the garden, okay, it's fair game. Everybody's sharing it. But if you're at home, he should be allowed to have his privacy when he's in the garden by himself. Okay, so. This is some Talmudic thinking. Okay, everybody still with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Didn't they have tents without windows though? Back in the day?
What you're saying in the desert?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for the opening of the door.
Well, the Mishnah is not talking about the desert. The Mishnah is talking about in Reykjavik. The Mishnah is saying that if me and my neighbor have a shared property and we decide that we're going to follow the Torah law, then this is the Torah law. If I bought a house and there is no window, I'm not allowed to construct a window.
So those houses over there, like that's technically not halachic. Halachic? Yeah. Yeah, those are not according to the law.
Well, you're talking across the street.
Yeah, like just as an example.
Okay.
Right. Quite open. Yeah, it's public.
We might be able to say that. But I wouldn't rush to say that because you can argue that it's on the street, and it's not necessarily the same situation that we're talking about with this like a shared like a more private. This is fairly public.
Yeah.
So it would make sense to say, and I'm not giving a halachic ruling right now, but I'm making a differentiation. I'm making a differentiation which could be true and could not be true. But it's possible to say that this courtyard on Lindergata is a public space anyways. By me opening my window here, that's not intruding on his privacy because he doesn't have any less privacy by me having this window. It's already more public, So I'm just saying that it's.
Trying to think what happens with curtains.
What?
Yeah.
No, we're gonna talk about curtains. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get to all of this. The Talmud thought of everything.
The Mishnah was written before they had curtains.
Curtains are an ancient thing.
Yeah.
I think.
Actually not, right? There's something
yeah.
about curtains in.
I would assume, but I have no
It's
idea.
not that difficult for the technology.
Okay, I would like to point you to a Mishnah in Bava Batra. Okay, this is a Mishnah, another statement from the Mishnah. Now pay very close attention. I know it might be late at night, but pay attention to this statement. In a jointly owned courtyard, the windows of the homes should not be constructed directly opposite each other. Any comment on this?
Could you say it again?
Isn't
In a jointly owned courtyard, the windows of the homes should not be constructed directly opposite each other.
we're not supposed not to build them at all?
Ah, there's a clear contradiction. Because in the previous Mishnah, we said that you're not allowed to construct a window at all over a shared, jointly owned courtyard. And here it's saying that when you build one, when you construct one, it shouldn't be opposite the other one.
I think
This is a contradiction.
This is kind of amendment to the former Mishnahs or former opinions.
Olga's onto something.
Because what I have understood during the period of times, changing technologies, changing lifestyles, I mean, these Mishnahs is also adding up different kind of opinions, which could be keep the people in social life comfortably, maybe, I mean, in the rules of Torah.
Right.
That's my
Very good, Olga.
understanding.
Very good. Okay, so to answer this contradiction, I'm not going to give it to you in the text, but Olga's saying that if I understood correctly,
No, this
Olga's
is not a
saying that-
contradiction.
That's
It's
not a contradiction. There could be a certain there could be a certain add-on, and Olga is 100% correct. And the answer is, I'm not going to give it to you within the text of the Talmud, but the answer to this contradiction is that this is talking about a special case. It's talking about a case where there is agreement. There's an agreement of both parties, right? So let's say I have my neighbor here. We share a courtyard. So imagine they give permission for me to construct a window. Okay, so I have permission to construct a window. So I'm allowed to construct a window because they gave permission. But even if they give permission, I'm not supposed, according to a Jewish law and Jewish values, I'm not supposed to build that window directly opposite their window.
Yeah.
Or if we're both building windows, it shouldn't be directly opposite each other.
Yeah, the main thing is
saying,
to protect the privacies.
Exactly. So basically what we're saying is...
Yeah, respect to each other's privacies.
Exactly.
It has to be, I mean, interpreted according to the changing or changes in time.
So in other words, there are different type of obligations that you have. There are personal obligations and society obligations. So if I have a personal obligation to my neighbor, then we could reach an agreement. The agreement could be that we're building windows. But then there's a society obligation. If there's a society obligation saying that windows opposite each other is not acceptable, then it doesn't matter if I have their agreement. It doesn't matter if I have their permission, because this is going against the Torah value or the Torah moral. So why does the Mishnah say here that when you construct windows, you shouldn't construct them exactly opposite each other? Because here we're talking about a case where there is agreement to build windows, but nevertheless, even with permission, you shouldn't be building windows directly opposite each other. So according to Torah law, this is the way windows should be constructed, regardless of whatever agreement the neighbors reach. Okay? Okay, let's look at another piece in the Talmud, and then we're going to go to our two more pieces, one in the Talmud and one commentary on the Talmud. Okay? If one's roof overlooks a neighbor's courtyard, okay? So let's say we have a balcony upstairs. That's not a roof, I'm sorry. If I get up onto my roof overlooks the neighbor's courtyard. The owner of the roof must construct a privacy wall that is at least 4 cubits high, approximately 6 feet. Okay? So again, the owner of the house has to build a fence around the roof in order that he shouldn't be able to in order he shouldn't be able to see what's happening in the neighbor's courtyard. What does this tell you about privacy issues? Anybody want to say something?
In modern day, is that what you're asking?
No, in general, what does this tell us about privacy?
Oh, 6 feet.
But it's
that's
very
like,
important.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
specifically, I would like to make a point, and you tell me if you agree with me. It is the responsibility of the, I don't know what to call him.
Of the viewer.
It's the responsibility of the viewer not to look into and to create a situation where he won't be able to intrude on the privacy of the neighbor. Okay, so not only is the Talmud telling us about the privacy, but it's saying who has the obligation. Whose obligation is this privacy? The obligation of the person.
basic is the discipline, the curiosity of the human beings.
Right. Okay, let's look at the next paragraph, and then we're going to talk about drones. In those days, most activity took place. This is going to explain the Talmud's. This is going to explain the Talmud. Doesn't mean that everyone has to start building 6-foot fences on the roofs. Let's understand the context of the Talmud. In those days, most activity took place in the courtyard, whereas the roof was seldom used. Thus, without the obstruction between them, the owner of the roof could see all that occurred in the neighbor's courtyard, and thus deprive him of his privacy. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the owner of the roof to construct the wall and bear all the expenses, and so avoid damaging his neighbor by denying him his privacy. It is thus not the potentially aggrieved party who would benefit from the wall who has to pay for it, but the one who threatens to perform the intrusion. Okay, so this is something that the Talmud is telling us who has the obligation to pay for this partition, who has the obligation to build it. So now, this is not to say that everyone who has a roof has to build a 6-foot fence. What this commentary is explaining is that in the olden days, the courtyards were used for basically everything, and the roofs were basically never used. So the neighbor is not expecting someone to be on the roof and intruding onto privacy. And if you do come onto the roof, then you should build a fence. Nowadays, it may be different because of the way houses are used and because of the way there are balconies and all different situations. So each situation must be taken in context. But what we could derive from here is that regardless of the situation, it is the responsibility of the intruder to not intrude upon the neighbor. Okay, now to drones and nanny cams. Let's try to answer the issues at hand. If I could find what I'm looking for. Okay, so anybody want to say give a Jewish legal opinion based on everything we learned about privacy? What is allowed and what is not allowed in regards to a drone? Yes.
Yeah, it seems to be that the halachic argument is that intruding upon anyone's privacy with nanny cams and drones is not allowed.
Okay, so let's start with drones. I think it's quite clear. I agree with Karen. Let me know if you disagree. Let's just say this for a second. It's clear that you're not allowed to gaze into, you're not allowed to peer into, you're not allowed to gaze at your neighbor, whether it's through a window or it's on a roof or with a drone. If you're taking a drone to fly over someone's property and to take a picture or video to see what they're doing, that's clearly not allowed. And this doesn't only include flying over their property. If you're flying in front of their property and hovering in front of the window or hovering in front of the garden and seeing what's happening in the garden, it's the same thing. You are not allowed to peer into your neighbor's property, right? I think that's very clear. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Let me know if you do. Even if someone has permission to construct a window opposite the courtyard of the neighbor, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to gaze into the window. It means that you're allowed to have a window. You're allowed to have light. I need light. I need fresh air. That's what the permission is for. The permission is never to peer into someone else's house. So I think we all agree. I don't see anybody arguing. So I'm assuming that we all agree that using a drone to peer into someone else's activity in his private property is not legal according to Jewish law. Anybody argue with that? Okay, very good. So we have.
There must be like other situations that allow.
Again, I'm not talking about in the nature. I'm not talking about the droning over a waterfall.
Like probably security, stuff like that. We can
Okay.
touch upon it.
I think generally the Patriot Act would not be approved in Judaism.
We're gonna get into security and to safety when we talk about the nanny camps. So just a second. So when it comes to drones, I think we all agree that according to Jewish law, it is forbidden to peer into someone else's activity on their private property with the drone. Okay. So basically, it's the responsibility of the pilot. It's the responsibility of the drone pilot not to look into someone else's private home. So just like the roof owner, has to build a fence because it's his responsibility not to intrude. It's the pilot. It's the pilot of the drone's responsibility not to peer in, right? So you can't say, "Oh, let him put window shades." Mushki mentioned before window shades. You can't say, "Oh, if he doesn't put up he didn't close his window shades. Obviously, I'm allowed to look inside." No, it's your responsibility. It's the responsibility of the pilot not to face the camera into the windows or not to face the camera into the backyard. And the problem of invading someone else's privacy is even if you're not trespassing, even if you're in public property, or even if you're on your own property, that doesn't change. It's true that someone could close the shades. It's true that someone could that the neighbor could close the curtains, but the Talmud never uses this logic to allow people to peer. The Talmud never allows, in everything that we read, the Talmud never allows somebody to look and do things because the other person has window shades. So obviously that would not be a sufficient counter argument according to the Talmud. In fact, in the case of the roof, we see clearly that it's the responsibility of the intruder. Okay. Now, I don't want to get so much into secular law. I don't want to get so much into Icelandic law because I don't claim to know all of the details. But I think it's interesting to mention, from my general research and from my very quick research into Icelandic law, it seems to me that if you are on public property, 100 meters away from a house, you are allowed to use your drone. Now, could you see what's happening in a house when you're 100 meters away? Could you see what's happening in a private garden 100 meters away?
If you have a good enough camera.
If you have a good enough camera, probably yes. So in this case, if I'm correct that this is the Icelandic law, that I could have my drone on the street as long as I'm 100 meters away from a building, it would turn out that the Torah law is more strict than the Icelandic law, because the Torah law says it doesn't matter where you are, you could be 200 meters away. But if you're trying to peer into someone's property, then you are invading the person's property. So if my understanding is correct, the Torah would have a stronger standard of privacy than the secular law. Probably because the secular law believes that if you're doing something private, it's up to you to keep your privacy. Close your curtains. Okay.
Who was saying, was it Kim that Dutch houses don't have, it's like the windows are open?
No, I don't know.
No? Who was just telling us that like it's in the culture, so that, were you at it? That they always like leave their windows open?
It's like that in Norway.
Is that what were you saying?
Why,
that?
so people can spy on
No,
people
no,
and
no, I think it was like something about like,
Leave your curtains open or leave your windows.
people were trying to be transparent, like I'm following the law, like maybe some of the
Like,
Nazis or
I've got
something.
nothing to hide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
there was a certain country, I forget.
Interesting. I don't
Well,
think it's
another
the
one.
opposite. It was the
Yeah,
left
maybe.
that sounds like some Eastern European thing where
Yeah.
communism would like, you know.
Yeah,
Like
so
a
basically
people
that's
shopping
the secular law, like if you have an
Yeah.
issue, close your curtains.
Right.
Okay, it's getting late. What time is it?
10,
Ay vey.
54.
And I hope you guys are going to come back again even after we went so long over time.
We'll make better
Okay, well,
choices.
let's. I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly, but this is the fun part. One of the fun parts. So let's talk about nanny cams for a second. Nanny camera. So is it ethical to use a nanny cam or a recording device just for audio to make sure that the children are being cared for and nothing is being stolen and so on? And the children are not being hurt. Mushki brought up the issue of security. This is security, this is safety, all of that. So we talked about a drone. It became very clear to us that you're not allowed to use a drone to peer into other people's places. But what about a nanny cam in your own home for a babysitter, for things like that? Is that ethical? Is that allowed? So in secular law, and I'm going to talk mostly in the little bit that I know about the United States, because that's what I'm a little bit more familiar with. Video recording is usually permitted if it's not a private place of the house. So, for example, the nanny's bedroom would be illegal to put a camera there. The bathroom would be illegal to put a camera there. However, in many states in the United States, audio is not allowed because of wiretapping laws. Some states require that both parties give consent. Some states only require one. In this case, you have one, of course. So in these states, this would result in the awkward law that video is permitted but audio is not, right? Because audio is not allowed because of wiretapping laws, and the video is allowed. And the video is allowed because it's not in a bathroom. Wiretapping is the laws of recording phone conversations. There are special laws about recording phone conversations. So some states, I don't know why I'm talking so much about the United States, but I think it's just to have a contrast. Some states say that you need consent of both parties to record a phone call. And some states say, no, you only need consent of one. So that means, which is the person. But that would mean that a third party is not allowed to record. The government is not allowed to record without a license to do so.
Well, they need a warrant, I think.
That's what I'm saying. Without a warrant, it would be illegal because then there's no consent.
When you research, you can't record a conversation without consent.
It depends on the place. I don't know what it is in Iceland, but
It was like that many years ago. I don't know. Now in the time of smartphones, who knows?
Yeah.
it doesn't mean it's legal just because it's easy to do it.
No.
I'm not saying that.
Just because it's easy to record somebody because you have a smartphone, it doesn't mean that it's legal.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay.
Mm.
So in some places you could have this awkward law. Video is permitted because it's not in the bathroom, but audio is not because of wiretapping laws. But what would the halacha say? What would the halacha say? Obviously, setting up a video in the house is an invasion of privacy, right? That's video. Obviously, video is an invasion of privacy. What about audio? The Talmud didn't talk about audio. The Talmud, for the most part, only talked about seeing. Didn't talk about listening, right? We didn't have any discussion of sticking your ear through the hole. listen to what the neighbor is saying when having a private conversation.
Later,
In fact, just a second, sorry. In fact, the case of the roof where it says that you need to build a fence, the Talmud is only concerned about peering. It only says that it has to be 6 feet high, but it doesn't say how thick the wall has to be. It doesn't say it has to be a certain thickness so that you shouldn't be able to hear. So it sounds like from the Talmud there is no issue of listening. In fact, so the Talmud doesn't say this clearly, and this is another example of the Talmud not bringing up every issue. So a later commentary brought up the question. In this case, the commentary's name is the Meiri. The Meiri raises the question, shouldn't the wall be thick enough so voices cannot be heard? The Meiri answers that people normally are careful with their words. If you're having a secret conversation, you probably have it indoors. People are, or if they're outside, they're going to speak very softly. That's the Meiri's answer. So basically the answer is that there is no issue of listening in, of eavesdropping, because here, when it comes to sound and when it comes to speaking, it's the obligation of the speaker. So when it comes to watching and to peering, it's the obligation of the intruder. But when it comes to speaking, secret things or private things, it's the responsibility of the speaker to say it in an undertone.
Yeah, but you don't know if someone is recording you, the whole thing that you don't know.
Exactly. Where this reason does not apply, for example, wiretapping, recording a phone conversation where the person doesn't know, so he doesn't know to speak softly, right? If I'm in my garden, I always know that the neighbor could be at the window, so I know to be careful. But if I'm on the phone, I'm not expecting someone to listen in. Or if I don't see anyone, I'm not expecting there to be a listening device on the wall. So what then? What is the halacha then? Obviously, audio would be a breach of privacy, according to the Meiri. Because what did the Meiri say? Now we're deriving something from the commentary who derived something from the Talmud. Okay? So we're deriving something from the Meiri. The Meiri said that the reason why the Talmud does not talk about eavesdropping is because it's the responsibility of the speaker to speak softly. But if the reason of the Meiri does not apply because it's recording a phone conversation where the person is not expecting to be recorded, or the person is an open place but he's not expecting a listening device, then what would the halacha be? Obviously, I think we could derive from the Meiri that it would constitute an audio tape would constitute an invasion of the person's privacy. Okay, so we reached the conclusion that video is a problem because that we saw clearly in the Talmud, and we reached the conclusion that audio is also a problem when the person is not expecting that there should be a listening device. Now, let us apply these rules that we just learned to a nanny cam, okay? I'm going to give some arguments to allow it and some counter arguments not to allow it. Let's try to go through this thinking. Now we're trying to apply. The argument to allow it is the Talmud forbade gazing at your neighbor in his property, but the nanny is in your property. So maybe we already agreed that the private we already agree that you're not allowed to invade someone else's property by seeing and listening. But perhaps that's only true in their property, but in your property, and this is your house, perhaps it's allowed. Okay? What's the counter argument to that? Why should ownership play a role? Who cares who owns the house? If I'm a guest in your house, just because I'm in your house, you should be able to invade my privacy and check out what I'm doing. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the counter argument is, why should ownership play a role? Who cares? There's an expectation of privacy even if you're in someone else's home. What's that?
Did it kind of go over that in the case of the shared courtyard, even if you own part of the property?
Okay.
You are still not allowed to spy on it. Well, look at it, have a window towards it.
Right. Right, but maybe you could say that it's different because that person owns 50%. But here I have total ownership. I shouldn't be able to put a video camera in my own home. I shouldn't be able to do it. The counter argument is maybe not. Maybe not, because you have guests. Your guests have an expectation, and it's fair that there is an expectation of privacy when you're a guest in someone else's house. Another argument to allow it. If I could walk into my home at any moment, why can't I place a monitor inside, right? I leave my nanny here. My nanny doesn't know when I'm going to walk into the house. I could walk in at any moment. So if I could walk in at any moment.
It's exactly like the courtyard.
Ah.
Like I can enter the courtyard, but when I see that you're in the courtyard, then I have to.
So that's the counter argument. The counter argument is that it shouldn't be allowed because the nanny knows when you come in. So the nanny knows to be more careful. I know when you're coming in. Everyone knows when someone comes into the room or you come into the house, you hear a noise or something. So you know that I know that I'm being watched now, right?
But,
so that's the counter argument.
But if nanny,
what's another argument to allow it? The argument to allow it is that I'm doing it for the safety of my children. I'm doing it for the safety of my children and my valuables. This should override your privacy. My children's safety is more important than your privacy. That's an argument.
Can I
what's
say
what's the counter argument? The counter argument is let's test your logic. Your logic is that safety comes first. Well, abuse is definitely a possibility. Physical abuse is a possibility, but that doesn't mean that I could put a video in the bathroom, even though abuse could take place in the bathroom, right? So obviously, you kind of see that privacy overrides safety, at least in certain cases. What's the final answer? I'll take your comments in a second. The final answer of any halachic Torah scholar would be, the final answer is that different rabbis could rule differently. We gave, based on the Talmud, based on the Mishnah, based on the commentaries, based on everything that we learned. So we see that there could be arguments for it and arguments against it. So when it comes to this issue, different rabbis could reach different conclusions. Now, the important, and because there's no Sanhedrin, so you need to inquire with your Torah scholar who you chose, and that's the one that you need to. That's the person who you follow. But it's important to point out that the Torah scholar who is giving this halachic ruling is keeping in mind all of these considerations that we said, all of these arguments that we made, and all of these counter arguments that we made. The halachic scholar has to include all of this in his final ruling, okay? And depending on the nature of the case, depending on the situation, he might go one way or another. So perhaps some questions that the rabbi might ask is there a suspicion on the nanny? Are there unexplained bruises that the child has? Right? So these are some questions that the rabbi might ask to determine which way to follow. But the bottom line is, the rabbi has to work with the Talmud, work with the Mishnah, work with all of the commentaries, not come with his own perspective because he likes nanny cams and he likes drones, not to come with his own personal feeling, but to take the merits of the case for itself, and to figure out what the answer is. And if, for example, in this case, to weigh very carefully what are the issues, what is the context, and what is the final ruling. So the bottom line is that in the case of the drone, we have a clear answer. We have a definite answer. You're not allowed to peer into other people's property with your drone. The case of the nanny cam, we do not have a clear answer. And here's where here's where there could be argument. So here you have a good example of how the Torah works today, how the system of Jewish law works today. So in certain cases we could make a very modern day question. In certain questions we could have very clear answers, even though it's a modern day issue and there were no drones 3,000 years ago. But with certain things where in certain things like the nanny cam, we might not reach a conclusion, and then it might be up to the rabbi to choose, to figure it out, and it might be up to the rabbi to dig deeper into the specific situation and find out, are there additional reasons for or against allowing a nanny cam? Any comments, questions, proofs, or refutes?
I would just like to, regarding this issue, it would sort of depend on when the owner of the house is installing the nanny cam, like before hiring the nanny, they could simply just make an agreement, like a business agreement, like the terms of working here will be having a camera here.
Yeah.
So that would change the situation from between that and suddenly installing cameras without letting him or her know.
That sounds like a good middle ground, and it could be that a rabbi would give that, but I think the question that we have, I see Massimo is raising the hand. I didn't know that. That's a good feature that I didn't know about. We'll get to your question in a second, but just to respond to what Finner said, Finner brought up something very interesting. Finner kind of brought up a compromise, if you will. Right? So you didn't really answer the question. You didn't really say, is it ethical or is it not? You're saying, let's do something that works for everyone. Let's make everyone happy. That might be the best idea, but it's also not answering the question exactly, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes the rabbi is put into a position where he does have to answer, right? For whatever reason, maybe in whatever case, the camera must be hidden. For whatever reason, maybe there's a certain suspicion or something, maybe something has to be free. I don't know. But let's say there is this question. There has to be a way to find the answer. And if a rabbi, by the way, a rabbi is allowed to say, I don't know. The rabbi could say, I don't know. And the rabbi could also say, I don't know. Maybe the best thing we could do is what Finner just suggested, right? So there are many different ways this could play out depending on the context. Let's hear what Massimo. You're on mute, so
yes.
unmute.
To me, what I get at the essence is fundamentally the respect of the privacy of a person. So if that is really the ultimate goal, I think I have no doubt about the drone, because the drone is truly intrusive. It can come and go, we never know. So it's, and it definitely doesn't ask for our permission. But I think when it comes to the nanny, for me, the point is, does the nanny know that there is that she's observed or not? Because for me, that is in a way also where the notion of privacy changes, because it's for, and it doesn't need to be a nanny. It could be me working in an office.
Exactly.
As long as I know that everyone is filmed in the office, not in the toilets, not in other parts. But when I know, yes, in many ways is an intrusion of my privacy, but I know, and I think that also changes everything, because you could have the nanny cam off, and you could be there as well and watching the nanny. So the nanny is still observed, but of course what changes for her is that she knows that you are there. She wouldn't know if the cam is on or off. So I think the point is also the respect of the privacy. Of course, now the security is yet another layer, because that I think that we are entering another realm there. But now, if we assuming that there is no violence, assuming that this what we are trying to answer here is the question of privacy, I think it's, for me, fundamental the awareness of the nanny on the fact that there is a camp. So
Okay.
and
We
that-
have a strong a legal case here with a strong a Jewish legal opinion, and I like it. I like it, Massimo. I would like to make two quick comments, and we could still continue the discussion. I'd like to make two quick comments, and those are both in the text on the last two pieces of text on our page. The first one says, establish a mentor for yourself. This is from the Mishnah, from Ethics of the Fathers. It says, establish a mentor for yourself. And when we talk about a mentor, when we talk about a Jewish scholar, a Torah scholar who you're going to go to, right? There's no Sanhedrin, there's no Supreme Court. So you have to choose who you're going to go to. So who are you going to go to? So of course, so of course it has to be someone who's doing it in the correct way. It has to be someone who's giving the true halachic opinion. It can't be somebody who's going against the rules. But separate to that, or in addition to that, I think a mentor should be someone who so besides for being well versed in Torah, someone who cares about you, someone who knows you, someone who understands your situation, and things like that. And by the way, asking a mentor is something, whether it's morals or values or Jewish law, whatever it might be, that doesn't show a lack of independence. Probably in any line of work, you're always kind of bouncing ideas off others. If you're a writer, you're going to check it with editors. If you're an architect, I don't know if you will or you won't, but perhaps you're bouncing it off other people. I'm sure in many lines of work, it's good to hear from a mentor in whatever capacity the mentor is. If it's a friend or it's a student or it's a manager, whatever it might be, there's a certain value in that because it's taking yourself out of the picture. So if you're a mother trying to figure out if a nanny cam is ethical, it's going to be hard to take yourself out of the picture, because that you're thinking about your child. You're not thinking about the teenager who's babysitting. You're thinking more about yourself and your child, right? So the benefit of a mentor and the right mentor is taking yourself out of the picture. Okay. The second point I'd like to make is the last piece of text on our page. It's also from Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim. The Torah that Moses commanded us is an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob, every Jewish individual. So I really enjoyed studying Torah with all of you tonight, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. The message of tonight is a few things. One of them, and we'll try to do a quick recap in a second, but one of the strong messages for tonight is that the Torah is an inheritance. What is unique about an inheritance? It's yours no matter what. You might like it, you might be interested in it, you might not be interested in it, you might have experience with it, you might not have experience with it. It might be something that you disrespected before. It might be something that you respected before. It doesn't make a difference. It's yours. It's 100% yours. It's an inheritance. And the same thing is with the Torah. There's no such thing that the Torah belongs to certain individuals or to certain community or to certain type of people or to certain level of observance. There's no such thing. The Torah belongs to the Jewish people. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. If you are the congregation of Jacob, and that's a reference to all of the Jewish people, the Torah is yours. The Torah is yours to enjoy. The Torah is yours to cherish. The Torah is yours for you to gain insight, inspiration, meaning, and intellectual stimulation, whatever it might be. So I would say one of the strong takeaways for tonight is we could see how relevant Torah is, or Torah could be in our lives. We could see the value of Torah. We could see the enjoyment of studying it, of the intellectual process and all of that. And I only encourage all of you to take more opportunities to do this type of study. Just to give a quick recap, if I could, and then you know, we'll be officially done. But of course, we could stay until the morning to continue discussing. A quick recap: we asked the questions about drones and nanny cams. In order to answer that question, we talked about what is the Torah and how does the Jewish legal system work. We talked about that there are two Torahs. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. The oral Torah is divided into three: received, derived, and legislated. We spent most of the class talking about category number 2, which is what most of the Talmud is. Most of the Talmud is category number 2 because it's figuring out all of the real issues that we don't have recorded. So we focused most on category number 2, and we basically got into the issues of privacy. We talked about privacy in shared courtyards. That no matter what, you're not allowed to peer into it. There's very strong sensitivity to privacy, and it's the obligation of the intruder to make sure they don't see. It's not the obligation of the person hiding what they're doing behind a window curtains or window shades. We talked about, so what else did we talk? So basically we talked about the privacy, and that led to the discussions of video and audio, looking and hearing. And we basically concluded that, well, it's too hard to give a synopsis on all of this, but on everything. But the conclusion, the answer to the two questions was that a drone is not allowed because a drone is peering, even if you're on your own property. You're not allowed to peer into someone's private behavior on their private property, even if with a drone, even if you're on public property or you're in your own property. It's simply not allowed. It's the obligation of the pilot to stay clear away from that. In terms of the nanny cam, we did not have a clear answer. We gave many arguments for it, many arguments against it, and then finally we talked about how to choose to now that there is no Jewish Supreme Court, to choose a Torah scholar, and that finally the Torah belongs to each and every one of us. Okay, I know that this class went totally over time, but there were too many good parts to skip anything.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Okay.
Almost settled, yeah. I think Bobby is open for one-on-ones.
Yeah, we definitely are.
Peering. We're
Privacy,
peering.
Exactly. Yeah. Speaking of someone's privacy.
Yeah, the video camera over there.
Well, actually, regarding the nanny camera, I'm just thinking that because
I'm going to turn off the video now. If I keep it on, then I'm invading your privacy.
Okay, thank you very much. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry, I'm leaving the video on. I'm turning off the recording. I'm
Yeah.
turning off the recording,
Okay,
okay?
so I have to
So-
wake up very early.
I know,
Thank
I
you
kept
very
you up
much.
late enough.
Yeah.
Stop recording.
Bye.